All right, well, welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by return guest and podcast favorite, Grady Hendrix, to talk about selling haunted houses, dolls, and more. So, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm actually in the middle, while I was so late to do this interview, I'm in the middle of putting the slides together for the How to Sell a Haunted House in the Challenging Market show that I'm going to be doing out on the road. So that's always a lot of fun, but I'm really diving into some really rank clip art and stock photos. Stock photos are so weird. Like you scroll through them enough and you're like,
Mhm.
people are no longer performing human behavior. They almost look like they're like doing whatever the AI told them to do. It's very,
Like,
very,
what are these prompts? What was that
yeah,
direction?
yeah. Like, I was looking at real estate clip art and, or stock photos, and like the number of pictures of people handing keys to people, and then it's like saying the word uncle over and over. It starts to lose all meaning, and then like the way they're handing the keys gets stiffer and stranger. I just felt like I'd slipped into some kind of parallel universe where human behavior was just off by like 4 degrees.
It's weird. I've heard a lot of good things about your book tours and live shows.
Oh, I'm glad. I do it mostly for mostly for myself because I did a regular book tour for Horror Store and like it was dismal, man. And I was like, I'll never eat turnips again. I'll never go hungry again. And like Scarlett O'Hara. And so the Best Friend's Exorcism one, I was trying to figure things out, but Paperbacks from Hell's where I started really understanding what people wanted to see. And also I feel like if people go through the trouble of leaving their house and coming
Mhm.
somewhere, like, should make it worth their while, at least try.
Yeah,
The idea of like just reading from the book and answering questions, I just would rather gnaw my own face off.
I get it. Well, as the daughter of two realtors, do you have questions for me?
Oh, totally. Well, it's funny, like, disclosure laws vary so much from state to
Mhm.
state. So where are
They
you? What
do.
state are you in?
My parents, Southern California.
So California is pretty they're with stigmatized properties. I think murders, you have to declare everything, I think.
Mhm.
Hauntings too, I think.
I think so. But I remember I would always tell my dad, like, "Oh, I walked by this house and it gave me creepy vibes." And he's like, "Give me the street address. I'll pull it up right now. I'll tell you if anything weird has ever happened there."
And were you ever on the money?
I was never, no,
Never. Wow.
never.
Well, it's funny, like, so many haunted houses, um, I mean, I don't wanna be a killjoy, but, like, they're just fabricated, and they're weird. Like, there's that, I mean, the Winchester Mystery House, I mean, that's all made up, None of that about Sarah Winchester is true. It's an interesting story,
Yeah.
but it's a weird story, and then you start getting to places like Myrtle's Plantation in Louisiana, where it's like you can spend a long time reading their website and looking at their Wikipedia page and all their stuff because it's what the woman bought it to like make a charming B&B, and then they were ghosts and she's like, oh no, my B&B is ruined, and then the press came and they covered it and she became and people started coming to see the ghosts, and now it's a big ghost tourism
Mm.
stop. And you can read that website for a long time and never see the word slavery. Uh, um, you know, uh,
Yeah.
and it's weird. Like, I was looking at how many like haunted bordello tours there are out west. And, Chamber of Commerce in El Paso basically brags about their haunted bordello tour. And you've got all these haunted plantations and things. And I feel like I don't know how I feel about going where or murdered sex workers live the
Yeah.
worst years of their lives, and going to see where enslaved workers live the worst
Yeah.
years of their lives. Like is that bad? I think it's bad. I mean,
It's icky.
these people were exploited and held captive when they were alive, and for the economic benefit of the people who owned the property, and now when they're dead the same thing's happening. It's really troubling.
It is.
So, anyways, yeah, that's my
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not the show doesn't talk about ghost tourism, but I find ghost tourism really weird because if you actually believe in ghosts, and why would you be on a ghost tour if you don't believe in ghosts? Then what you're doing is really questionable. the sort of ethics and morality of it.
I've never done one.
I don't want to. Like, I mean, I like ghost stories, but like you start thinking about who these ghosts are, and it's like they're murdered women, they're murdered sex workers, they're murdered
Yeah.
enslaved workers. Like they are, murdered children. Like you're like, what am I doing? Like what am I looking at here?
I say I don't think I've ever really thought about the ethics of that, but you make a good
Yeah.
point.
Well, I mean, the only I will say there is one there are a couple of ghost stories about ghosts going on tour. There's there's a great one I think from like the third, and I can get behind that. Like, um, there's a great one from like the 13th century or something where this woman like is walking through Rome and she sees like her godmother coming out of a basilica for the Virgin Mary, and like her godmother's been dead for a while, and she's like, "Oh, were you so and so?" And her godmother's like, "Oh, totally." And she says, "Well, what are you doing? You're dead. What's your ghost doing?" And the ghost of her godmother says, "Well, before I died, I was absolved of my sins, but I forgot to mention to the confessor that I was like a big old lesbian back in the day and I had sex with tons of girls and like totally slipped my mind, forgot to confess it. So when I died, I went to hell for not confessing and being forgiven for all my girl sex." And she's like, "Oh, well, so what are you doing wandering around? Like, you should be in hell, I
Mm,
guess." And the godmother's like, "Well, the Virgin Mary was like, I think this is, all these lesbians in hell. It's bad. I don't like it." And apparently there were like 30,000 of them, and the Virgin Mary's like, "Nope, I'm taking you all out of hell, and you can go to
a
heaven."
big one for Merchant Mary.
Right? And then before they went, all 30,000 of the dead lesbian ghosts were like, "We want to go on a worldwide tour of all the holy places for the Virgin Mary because she's awesome." And so they're
Yeah.
doing like a ghost tour. And the godmother's like, "I gotta go, gotta run, bye." And it
Don't
takes
wanna
off
miss
to
the
the
next
next
stop.
stop. Yeah, it's probably a pretty fast tour. You're like out, get off the bus, run, get back on the bus, go to the next stop. But I can get behind that ghost tourism.
Yeah. Afterlife, like, under the Tuscan sun deal going on.
Exactly.
Alright, well, you have a new book that I think when this episode comes out, it will have been out for a week.
Okay,
Yeah, so How
I
to
do
Sell a
have a new
Haunted
book.
House. Yeah. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, How to Sell a Haunted House is about a adult brother and sister who can't stand each other because they're a brother and a sister. And unfortunately, when their parents pass away in an accident, they have to work together to clean out their childhood home and put it on the market. And of course, it's haunted. All that's right there in the title. But what the title doesn't tell you is it's haunted by puppets and dolls, which I'm sorry, disgusting. Um, but it's everyone goes, "Oh, puppets and dolls are so gross and creepy," but we're surrounded by them every day. Um, I had forgotten that we had a doll cabinet like in our den where we ate breakfast. All these little dolls in this glass cabinet watching us until like I was writing the book. We grew up with all this crap all over the place, and it's spooky.
Yes. I guess. Maybe as I got into a teenager, they started making me really uneasy. My
Yeah.
grandmother would make me sleep in the middle room, and that's where she had floating shelves full of dolls. And then the ones that scared me the most were the timeout dolls. I don't know if you're familiar.
Oh, the ones with their arms crossed that
They
hide
have
their
no face.
faces.
Yeah, they have
They're
no face.
totally
They're just
they're Blair Witching it. They're, like, right at the end of the Blair Witch with the guy in the
yeah.
corner. That's what the timeout dolls are.
Yeah, and there was like 3 of them right at the foot of the bed that I would sleep in, and I wouldn't sleep a wink. I was just looking at them waiting for them to turn around because I was just convinced the minute I turned the light off and closed my eyes, that's when they were gonna turn around.
Oh, totally, totally, and they probably did. They just waited for you to go to sleep,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
they just stood over you with their little blank faces. Um, but also, though, we think of dolls like that, but also, like, we fill our cubicles up with action figures and Funkos and
That's
Baby
true.
Yoda dolls, and our dogs have dolls. You know what I mean? It's like we're really surrounded by tiny little imitation versions of ourselves.
My daughter's too, so she is in her big baby doll phase.
Oh, like
A lot of
actual
that.
baby dolls that like goo goo gaga baby dolls.
Yeah, she loves it. She loves taking
It's
care of them.
it's weird. I find that weird. So let me ask you a question because gendered toys for kids, right? Like my sister was one of those. My kids will not play with guns, and then she's like, they just turned everything they found into a gun. She has two sons, but like, did your
Yeah,
daughter?
that
Was she like? Did she have friends who had baby dolls? Like, where does the urge come from? Where does it?
I don't know because my son is 8, so a lot of the time she would just play with his toys, but she
Right.
went to a daycare for a little bit, and that's what she wanted, that's what she played with was the dolls that she did not have at home, and my husband and I were like, "Oh, we never even thought about getting her dolls, that wasn't a
Yeah,
thought that crossed our mind, but I guess if she likes them and she actively wants them, sure, like, we'll
sure.
get you some dolls."
Yeah, I guess as a kid, like, the idea of playing parent to something just seems so
Maybe.
tedious to me. I'm saying, but I had tons of action figures, Star Wars
Mhm.
and GI Joe and stuff, and they would fight constantly, or get along, or have dinner, or whatever. But yeah, the thought of I don't know. I can't. I don't have that urge. Which
I don't know.
so it's hard for me to identify with it. But I guess it's
Yeah, my
powerful.
my son was pretty paternal though. He did like also taking care of like his action figures and calling them his children and being a dad.
Oh wow. Well, I guess my
So,
stuffed animals, I was really always concerned that they were like warm enough and tucked in enough, and like
yeah.
I would leave books on the bed so they could, like, read, like, while I was gone at school so they weren't
Yeah.
bored. So, yeah, maybe that's, like, those are all part of the same thing.
I will say in
Oh,
this book, we are back in Charleston,
again.
modern day. So what was that like as someone who grew up there, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, thank God it was modern day because, like, Charleston's so changed from when I grew up that I was, like, writing books set there in the '80s and the '90s. I was having to, like, not look at things when I drove around, which made it hard to drive. Yeah, I'd hear thumps a lot and get home with the little hair stuck in the bumper. Um, but it was really hard because Charleston's so radically different from where it was when I grew up. So it was just really nice to not have to avoid looking at what was around me. But this is it. I'm done with Charleston. Time to move on. I'm a
Really?
big boy. I can write about other places.
So this is like the tight Charleston trilogy
Yeah, I
over
got I
on.
got nothing else to say about it. You know what I mean? Like people from Charleston love talking about Charleston, as do I. But like I need for the sake of my sanity, I need to move on. But I also, I'm probably always going to be writing about that part of the world just because it's what I know, and it's so
Mhm.
it makes the curve so much shorter when I'm ramping up a book. I'm writing a book set in St. Augustine, Florida right now, and it's like, well, Savannah, Charleston, St. Augustine. It's three historic southeastern coastal cities with big tourist industries and historic downtown. So, like, I'm in the same ballpark. I can't go from zero. I just can't. I'll never learn enough about a place to write it authentically. If like starting from zero, I don't think.
Has Charleston always been the tourism hotspot that it is today? I mean, I guess I've only
Not
been aware of it since I moved out from California to Indiana and then here to Pittsburgh, where I heard people say, like, they go to Charleston to vacation.
Right. It's weirder now than it was. Like, it's way more touristy than it was. Like, now cruise ships stop there and all this stuff.
Mhm.
But when I was growing up, I mean, we still had the carriage tours. We still were historic. It was just a lot sleepier. It was a lot quieter. Downtown was smaller. It was really, really different. But it's been a touristy city for going back forever. Yeah, and it's weird. You grow up with like a love hate, well, mostly a hate with tourists. Like I have a hard time being a tourist now and not feeling really weird and guilty and out of place and awkward because you grow up just like the answer to every question about what's annoying you is a tourist. Who's
Yeah.
blocking all the traffic? A tourist. Who's driving too slow? A tourist. Who's standing in front of me like a goober and not getting out of my way because I need to go in that store and exchange these pants? A tourist. Who's driving
Yeah.
up prices? Tourists. Like, so it's just like, so to be a tourist is really, it's conflicting. It's a conflict for me.
Yeah.
And a ghost tourist, don't, I can't even.
I'm gonna say my husband's family is from up in Traverse City, Michigan. But it is funny to hear my in-laws talk about like, oh, when Cherry Fest is in town, like it's impossible. You can't go to the store. And it is like, I don't feel like it's that much traffic compared to living in a city, but just like the little change for them is like, I can't believe it. I can't go anywhere.
Yeah. Well, because your economy's dependent on these people, so it
Yeah.
turns into this like real hostage situation. You want their money, but you resent their presence.
I really loved the book. I don't think I said that in the episode yet, but
Oh,
I
yeah. I mean, you
really
don't have
liked
to,
it.
but I appreciate it. I love compliments.
I mean, I love the kind of stories, even outside of horror, that feature adult siblings coming back home for whatever reason. That is like catnip for me. I will eat it every time. Like wedding, funeral, bringing someone home for the holidays for the first time. Like I just love that.
Do you have
And
siblings?
I do.
How many?
I'm the oldest. I have a younger sister and a younger brother.
Okay.
Is it different because I'm the oldest?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. No, it sounds like it's not. I mean, because I love that. I was just doing that over Christmas with my family. I love that like chaos energy,
Yeah.
and everyone's mental age regresses to like 15.
Yes. I was gonna mention that. You did capture the like you're back home and suddenly all your bad habits from when you were 16, like you're an angsty teenager, everything is getting under your skin just like it used to.
Well, it's also with your siblings. It is you make up your mind about your sibling when you're a kid and your brother or sister is a kid, and then you never really change your mind for the rest of your life. It's really weird. It's very unfair.
It is. Well, quite a bit older than my stepbrother. I'm 7 years. It's a 7-year difference. So when I left for
Okay.
college at 18, he was 12 and he was really annoying. And, he's a man now. He's out of college. He has a grown job. And I still have a hard time seeing him. Like, you're just like an annoying little kid.
Oh, absolutely. And also friends, siblings, like friends, brothers and sisters, you're like, "Oh my god, you were so annoying when you were a child and you're still annoying." And like, they're like a chief resident in neuropsych or something, like, and you're like, "Ugh, you're such a loser."
Uh,
But yeah, no, but I really love those interactions. And it's funny, like my family as my parents are getting older because I've got 3 older sisters and then a much younger half brother. But my family, so especially my sisters, as our parents get older and really, or their health is sort of, they're in their late 80s and they're having to make a lot of their health is really a factor in what they can do now. And it's interesting to see the 4 of us sort of trying to figure out what we look like as a family once our parents die. You know what I mean? It's like it's really hard to figure that out. Like it's you suddenly don't have those people you had in common, that were the common denominator.
yeah,
And
that is
it's
true.
weird.
I mean, do you also have you're going to have to come together to go through their estate part of it?
Oh yeah, I mean we'll have to. Well, exactly. And and I already get warning signs about, I've already got different sisters who want dibs on different things, and I'm the executor of my mom's will, and so because I'm the boy, and I already have people laying dibs on stuff, and Jesus Christ, it's already my mom. Not only is the corpse not even cold yet, it's still moving and
She's not
talking and
she's not
like
even dead.
yeah, she's, driving a car still, and so, like, but we're already, "Oh, I really want that dictionary stand. I really want that painting." Actually, there's a painting none of us want. It's a family painting, but, like,
Of you
it's,
guys?
yeah, and so, like like, we might just assign it to one of us,
You don't have to display it, just keep it in the garage or something,
like the
just to have
family
it.
of Dorian Gray.
Yeah. Maybe it'll keep you all from aging.
Well, we also all had these portraits painted of us by this woman who was a Charleston artist, Alicia Ra and her claim to fame was that she was an extra or had a minor character role in Gone with the Wind. And so we all have these posed oil portraits of us as small children, and we look like the gloomiest, most gothic family from like 17th century Spain. But instead of like posing with like these, we're supposed to be like our stuffed animals and little toys and things. They're
Mhm.
really weird and like mine's afflicted with some kind of rot, and so it's like degenerated into this. I look like some hideous um, family weirdo who's been locked in the attic with like some horrible skin condition for 30 years. It's really bizarre. So I don't know what we're going to do with those too. Maybe we'll have a big
I don't
picture
know.
burning when my parents die.
Yeah, it could be cathartic.
Oh my God. And then like we throw the pictures in and all of us just collapse into ashes as we watch.
A big hereditary moment.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so the book does deal with the unfortunate death of Louise and Mark's parents, and that's what brings them together. And you mentioned that Louise and Mark do not care for each other, coming together to deal with this estate. And I will say that was extremely stressful reading experience on my part. And as I was reading it, I absolutely hated Mark with every ounce of passion. Like every cell in my body absolutely hated him. And I was thinking, I'm like, at some point he's going to try to flesh him out and I will not buy into it. I hate this man.
He's hateable.
But then we get a little more of his side and I was like, oh, Mark.
Well, it was really fun to write Mark. I love guys like that, big, loud dudes who are their own worst enemies and who are always a lot of fun, but the party never stops. I love guys like that. And, but you don't wanna be around them a whole lot.
No.
Limited doses is key to keeping the love alive. So Mark was a blast to write, but yeah, Louise has a version of her family story that she thinks is the right one, and Mark has a completely different one that he thinks is the right
Mhm.
one. The fact is they're both right and wrong, you know? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember several times being really just carpet yanked out from under me, blown away when I would hear a family story from one of my sister's points of view that was just so radically different from my experience, and I think,
Mhm.
"God, what? Are you just making this up to mess with me? Is this what you're doing? Is that how sad you are?" And then I realized that, no, this is their experience, and so those moments really rocked my world, and so I was hoping to get a little of that in there, just
Yeah.
that idea that we think we've got our family's number, and we never do.
No. Well, I think in getting more into that with the generational trauma that's
Oh,
going
right.
on that they're dealing with. And I think also, yeah, looking at certain generations whose way of dealing with problems was not dealing with them or not
Yeah.
talking about things because it was not pleasant to talk
Yeah.
about. And we don't talk about things that are not pleasant to talk about. I understand.
Yeah, and on the one hand, I do miss that a little bit. Like, people who could just handle something horrible, dust their hands off, put it in a box, and never think about it again. And I feel like there is a generosity about that, you know what I mean? Like, I know if you go through the most humiliating, worst time in your life, it's nice that people don't bring it up all the time or ask
Yeah.
you about it all the time, but at the same time, you're going to want to talk about it. And it's also nice that people don't pretend it didn't happen when you want to talk about it. So I feel like both sides of that work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a trait that's rapidly going by the wayside. And my family, my parents got divorced when I was about 13. And so my oldest sister was probably in her early 20s, and we really did grow up as a a family that on the outside was trying to be perfect. My mom
Mhm.
made matching outfits for my sisters. Like, it was very nicey nicey, and we weren't, and no one is. And so when they got divorced, it was such a relief that we didn't have to pretend everything was okay anymore. And after that, my sisters and I were like, "We'll talk about anything. What do you want to talk about?" Yeah,
Yeah.
it's no holds barred. And that was, I think, much healthier if you got to go to one extreme or the other.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always room for nuance. And I think with the characters, you do, like Louise's mother and their aunt, like really getting into what their thoughts were. And at the time, they thought what they were doing was in the best interest of
Yeah,
their family. This is what they
exactly.
thought was right. They were not doing a malicious thing where it's like, we're not going to talk about it because we're embarrassed. It's like, we're saving people from pain.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it, there's something really generous about that. Yeah, um, but yeah, and too often that was, a bit of a club that got used. That kind of silence was a club that got used to sort of fit people into certain perceptions of them. But it's interesting. VC Andrews talks about this. She only did a couple of interviews, but she talks about it a lot. That people can laugh at her book and think they're over the top and ridiculous. And she said, but I really believe in opening up all these closets and letting these skeletons out and showing people that they exist, that things they didn't even dream of existing are out there and exist in families, and
Mhm.
that's happened to more people than just them. That they're
Yeah.
not alone. And although, my God, if you read My Sweet Audrina and you're like, I identify with that, like, you really, I hope you're getting the help you need. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm with VC Andrews. I stand with Virginia.
Before we get into books, I do have some questions from Patreon supporters.
Yeah,
Real quick.
bring them on.
Danielle wants to know what book got you into horror.
it's hard because as a kid, I really didn't read much horror. The covers
Mhm.
squeaked me out too much. And I read like Stephen King like anyone else and Clive Barker like anyone else growing up. But I mostly read like sci-fi and military stuff and was really into armies. Trying to think of book that, well, I'm going to give you two short stories that really yanked my crank. One is The Raft by Stephen King in
Mhm.
Skeleton Crew, that collection, because The Raft really, I just went back to it again and again. It is so bleak and so relentless and so dark. I got that book, the hardcover, for Christmas the year it came out. So I think that was like 85, 86, somewhere in there. And I would have been like 13. And I just read The Raft again and again. I couldn't believe it. Like, I just couldn't believe it. It's so abstract and so weird and
Yeah.
so just hit me. Um, and then the other one, there were when we my dad taught at an offshore medical college in the Grenadines in the summers, um, and so we would go down to St. Vincent and stay in these little faculty housing cottages, and he'd teach during the day. And one year there were two of those Clive Barker Books of Blood paperbacks down there because a lot of Brits taught down there and stuff. I think these were American editions. So, and there were two stories that really blew my mind. And one was In the Hills, the Cities, which is such a surreal, over the
Yeah.
top, powerful, powerful book. And Weave World also later when I read that by Clive Barker, it really blew my mind. But In the Hills, the Cities really just I had never encountered anything like it. And then by the same token, and that's I think the same volume or maybe the other volume, there was a story called The Yattering and Jack, which is a
It's
comedy.
that one,
Which
yeah.
yeah, which is, a guy he's haunted by a demon and he just decides to ignore it, to drive it crazy, and it works. And those two stories came from the same writer and were sitting side by side and were both classified as horror and were so wildly different. Really made a deep impression on me. So I would say that's where I sort of really began to think about horror, those three stories.
You think because of the blending of, like, seeing something so horrific and then seeing, like, lighthearted horror comedy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, but also so much of horror is funny.
Yeah.
I Alien is a really grim movie and a dark movie, but there's a lot of really funny jokes in it. Like Yaphet Kotto and Harry Dean Stanton are hilarious comic buddy act. And so people just forget that horror always has some jokes in it. And the one that made the biggest impression on me is Return of the Living Dead from I think '85 because it starts out so funny and it just gets darker and darker and darker as the situation gets more and more dire until it really turns into maybe one of the bleakest horror movies almost ever made. But it never cheats. It just stays honest to what's going on all the way through.
I have not watched that.
Oh, it's so good.
Ryan wants to know what film got you into horror?
Okay, so films are different. Like my friends and I would rent horror movies um and have sleepovers and stuff. So to me, horror movies were always super social and stuff. Um, I'm not sure which one started for me. I will say though that sort of the young twosome of Something Wicked This Way Comes, the Disney movie, and Watcher in the Woods, both really did something for me. I remember seeing the TV ads because I wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies, and I think both those were PG, so I could go with my family. And I remember seeing the ads and just drooling over them for weeks and weeks and weeks, and like begging my parents to take me to those movies. And Watcher in the Woods is okay, but Something Wicked This Way Comes really doesn't disappoint, or it didn't. I never want to rewatch it as an adult because what if it lets me down? But life is full of disappointments. I don't need another one. But those two really did. I remember just being sort of like I was like a chihuahua on coffee pills, just like and it must have been so annoying.
Then Rachel wants to know, is there a subgenre you have no interest in writing?
Yeah, erotica. I just not my bag. More power to the people who write it. I'm just not. It's just not. I can't do it with a straight face. And so it's just not my thing.
I understand that. I'm on that side of TikTok where I get a lot of people that read those books, and I'm like, "I don't really get it, but it seems to make you happy, and that's what
Yeah.
matters."
Well, it's funny when putting together the show for How to Sell a Haunted House, I was reading a lot of haunted ghost stories and haunted house stories, and so I downloaded a couple of anthologies of, like, horror erotica, like, "Oh, there might be something funny in here I can use," or, something that'll and it was just like, just wasn't I don't know, it wasn't my I am not averse to porn or erotica or anything. This is not a judgment of
Mhm.
the category, but spooky erotica, it just wasn't where my head was, it wasn't doing it for me. And zombie erotica really disturbed me. I actually found that genuinely
Oh,
disturbing. Not because I'm like, oh, the person who wrote this is sick, but just because the actual physical act of having sexual interactions with a rotting corpse just really not my thing.
definitely not. And then last question, Tessa wants to know, is there anything you've had to edit out of books that you did not want to?
Yes, actually, in How to Sell a Haunted House. Well, first off, I never want to
Really?
edit. I always think my editor's full of it. I'm always like, God. But they're usually right. I'm just like, I've got a big ego. But in my best friend's exorcism, Southern Book Club, and in How to Sell a Haunted House, there's a place in Mount Pleasant called Nature's Garden that I always want to get in these books. It is right across the. So it's basically the intersection where Mark and Louise's parents get killed in their car. Happens on the first page, guys, or
Mhm.
second page. I don't. Where their accident happens is right there with Nature's Garden. And there was a version of this book where Nature's Garden was involved in an accident. Nature's Garden has been there forever. It's this shack with like screen nailed up on it. And outside of it are 300, 400, 500 yard sculptures. Everything from pink flamingos to concrete yetis to little children bending over and showing their butts to St. Francis of Assisi. Just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And then Nature's Garden sells them. It also, sand dollar paving stones for your garden path. It also sells boiled peanuts, which are pretty good actually, and is a little produce stand as well. I've tried to get Nature's Garden in every single one of my books in Charleston, and I always have to edit it out for room. It just like sticks out like a sore thumb. There's nothing to do with it. It just sits there because I want to write about Nature's Garden. Never been able to. I've had to cut it.
So is that always their note? It's just like, it's not necessary.
Yeah, and by now I'm just like, yeah, yeah, I know. I guess that page and a half about Nature's Garden's got to go.
Well, we are talking about haunted houses today. We almost did dolls, but I did just do like a doll episode a few months ago. But it would have been exciting because when I did the doll episode, I was kind of talking about the lack of killer dolls. A lot of them were a little more psychological and like, ooh, is it the doll or is it really all in this person's
Oh,
head?
what were y'all covering? Just quickly, what were the?
I did magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. I did a Ellen Datlow anthology called The Doll Collection,
Hmm.
where she specifically said in the call out like no killer dolls. So
Oh,
no killer dolls.
wow.
And then I read one called Frozen Charlotte, which did have killer dolls, and I was pretty
Yeah.
happy. It was a YA story. Did you read that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought it was fun, and it was nice to
Yeah.
see dolls getting their hands dirty. There's a really good one I stumbled across by Susan Beach York, Carol Beach York, called "Revenge of the Dolls." 103 pages. It's juvenile fiction from the 70s, but it does have a killer hands-on doll in it. But it's beautifully written. Really reading that book blew my hat off. It was just the whole book feels like childhood ending, and it's like it's
Mhm.
just all about those sort of disappointments, and it's just lovely. It really is. So
Ooh, I'll have to check that out.
and Magic
What was
really
it
blew
called
me
again?
away. Revenge of the Dolls by Carol Beach York, I think. But
Okay.
Magic really blew me away too, and that's a book I've tried
Mhm.
a few times to get into. And the first 30 pages, I just like are tedious as hell, and then it really gets going.
I was very confused by the writing style because it jumps around so much and it doesn't tell
Yeah,
you it's jumping around. I was reading it at night before I went to bed and I would just be a little drowsy and like, wait, he's in high school? I thought he was what? What is
yeah,
going on? So it
yeah,
took me a
yeah.
while to really and then I watched the movie and the movie is a bit more like linear, like point A to point B.
How is
This
the
is the
movie?
story as It's pretty good. It's got young Anthony Hopkins.
That's always fun. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I gotta say, it took me about half of that book to get into it. By the time I was done, I was really glad I stuck with it because I think it really
Mhm.
pays off and is worth reading. And sometimes William Goldman is like he's one of those writers that like he just makes me feel really inferior and stupid on sort of a line by line level. Um, yeah,
Really?
but yeah, it was hard to get into though.
This episode is brought to you by Fangoria, the world's best horror and cult film magazine since 1979. Listeners can use code Books in the Freezer to get 20% off their order. That includes, of course, merchandise and first time subscriptions and single issues of the magazine. Not only are there tons of articles and interviews about upcoming horror movies, there's a regular segment by Stephen Graham Jones all about slashers called Slasher Nation, so you're going to want a copy. So again, that is code Books in the Freezer, and thank you, Fangoria, for supporting the show. Well, should we get into some books?
Let's do it.
So, the first book I wanted to talk about is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This is my favorite book I read last year.
Yeah,
But this is about a woman named Vera. Her mother's reached out to her to call her back home to her childhood home, the Crowder House. And coming back home is complicated because she's been estranged from her mother for several years. And her dad was a convicted serial killer who murdered people in the basement. Makes things a little complicated coming
yeah,
home. And then there's an artist that's she's the mother's been housing that lives in the pool house that's kind of just looking to capitalize the house for memorabilia and is just kind of waiting for the mom to die. And so it's just a lot of complicated interactions with everything. Like she's in the town and everyone is super weird to her, because her dad was the noted serial killer of the town. And a lot of this book just felt very claustrophobic and you almost like don't know what to think about Vera as a narrator and you kind of start to wonder like why the people in the town are how they are to her. Like maybe is there more to this story than she's letting on? And then, like creepy stuff starts happening in the house. She starts finding notes in her father's handwriting. Her father died in prison, so there was no way he could have done that. And I really liked where this story went, and it took a direction that I was not expecting, which I think might not work for everyone, but I personally very much enjoyed it.
yeah. I haven't read it, but I really like Sarah's writing a lot. I liked Echo Wife a whole lot, and there is a thing, right, with children of criminals that I find fascinating, because they get tarred with the same brush, and they didn't do anything. They were just born.
Yeah.
So I'm actually annoyed that sort of went there with that before I got a chance to. Uh, because I don't know what it is I would do with it, but I wanted to do something about the child of a serial killer for a while. Even though serial killers are a little overdone, I feel like their families, their kids aren't. And the fact that, you learn about the BTK killer's wife and I think daughter, and we're sort of in the media, and these families have to live with it, and Jeffrey Dahmer's father, and it's just, good God.
Yeah, being connected to that. So rating wise, I would say this was like a fridge. I think there was some freezer worthy parts that genuinely creeped me out, but would highly recommend it. Like I said, one of my favorite books that I read last year. That is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey.
So I picked three. The first one is sort of gimme. Everyone's going to roll their eyes at this one. But Anne Rivers Siddons was best known as being sort of a Southern lady writer, stories about families and the South and about women with the, very much like sort of realist lit fic kind of stuff, but more popular than lit fic. But she wrote one horror novel in the early 80s called The House Next Door that really is. Stephen King goes on about it at length in his nonfiction book, Danse Macabre. So I feel like it's a little been there, done that for some people, but it is such a classic that I felt remiss not mentioning it. It reads fast. She's a really readable writer, and it's got. I'm a sucker for sort of that early 80s suburban living, pictures of martinis and gin and tonics and people driving to tennis in their station wagon and stuff. And I mean, that's kind of the suburbs I grew up in. And so this book is full of that. And there's a bit it's told in first person, and there's a bit of a bitter, poisoned tone to the narrator. It doesn't sit right at first, and it's only when you get towards the end of the book you're like, I got where this is coming from. But it's about a couple who live in a beautiful Atlanta suburb, and someone builds a really architecturally beautiful house next to them. And there's just something about the way the house is put together that brings out the worst in people and kind of urges them to their own destruction. And it's got some of the
Ooh.
it's got two really phenomenal set pieces in it. And if you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's one of those books that you pick up and you like blow through in a day. It's really
Okay.
phenomenal. So
I will have to pick that up. It's been on my TBR for a long time. But I did one time look through Goodreads and look at um, her other books, and you're right. They're all like Southern women's fiction. And
yeah,
I was very taken aback. I was like, oh, maybe I'll look at what other horror novels she's written. I'm like, doesn't look like much.
yeah, none. And it's interesting. I've never read an interview with her where she talks about why she did this one, and it's also weird that it's so good. Like she doesn't fall into any of the traps that sometimes sometimes a writer will like quote unquote slum in another genre, and you can tell
Mhm,
they just feel like it's a little beneath them, and they do things that to people who know the genre are a little hackneyed, but they act like they just discovered
mhm.
fire. And she doesn't make any of those missteps, which I find really impressive, given that this was a one and done for her with horror.
Yeah, wow.
I would put this in the freezer. There's a set piece in this that is really unpleasant on a social level because I feel like one of the problems with horror is an arms race, right? Like, oh, we've all seen fingernails get ripped off now. Like, back in Pet Cemetery, Stephen King could cut someone's Achilles tendon, and everyone was like, ooh, oh my God, we've never seen that before. Now, like, pulling fingernails, pulling teeth with, like, you really got to go there. But what we're all still vulnerable to is humiliation and shame. Um, and I think we may have strong stomachs for gore, but strong stomachs for humiliation and just awkwardness and shame, we don't have them. And so, like, and this,
Like secondhand cringe.
yeah, and this book has a set piece that's mortifying. So I'd put it firmly in the freezer. And it may not be a
Oh,
set
wow.
piece that people think has aged well, but I think it has. And I think Siddons was well aware of sort of the sexual politics at play with it.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
She's not dumb. She knew what she was doing with that scene.
So what was that title again?
Oh, The House Next Door by
Okay.
Anne Rivers Siddons.
My next one is called White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a YA novel. It follows a girl named Marigold who is moving to the Midwestern city of Cedarville with her newly blended family. Her mother has accepted a grant with the Sterling Foundation. And with that grant, she gets accommodation. So she gets a free house for a year. And it's a newly renovated house, but on a block full of just dilapidated houses. So it is like the only livable house in Maple Street. And Marigold has some issues adjusting to her new home. She's bringing a lot of trauma just from this divorce and the new living situation and missing her dad, and stuff that she went through back home. But now in her new house, she notices that doors close by themselves, household items go missing, and her new stepsister tells her about her new friend that wants her to get out. It gets a little spooky, but I will say she does a great job of crafting the story and having the nods to the monsters are due on Maple Street, like they live on Maple Street, and you kind of get a little bit of that
Ah,
thematically. I think one thing Tiffany D. Jackson's always really good at is bringing in like also big current issues into her story without them feeling forced. Like last year, she released The Weight of Blood, which was like a Carrie retelling about segregated high schools. But in this one, she talks about it's a haunted house story, but it's also tackling issues like gentrification and the war on drugs and for profit prisons in a way that I feel like just seeped in naturally into the story. I'd say this was a fridge book.
Fridge.
There was a few scenes, and the ending, when everything gets revealed, did creep me out a little bit. So that was White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson.
All right. Um, I haven't read it, so I got
So
nothing. But it does sound good. Even though it's a fridge, not a freezer. So my next one is The Elementals by Michael McDowell. And have you read it?
yes, I love it.
Yeah, anyone who hasn't read it needs to read it. It's about a family of the McCraes, I think the McCraes, and they live down in Alabama. And every summer they go out to, oh gosh, I think it's called Beldon, and which is their like country house for, sort of their beach house for the summer. And it's not one, it's three identical Victorian houses on this spit of sand sticking out into the Gulf, and they get
Mhm.
separated at high tide from the mainland. And there's the Savage family and the McCrae family, and they're sort of, a blended family. And one family's in one house, one family's in the other house, and then the third house is uninhabited. And it's slowly being consumed by the sand dunes. And also it's full of ghosts, but they're not really ghosts. It's interesting. So I never really, but anyways, so Michael McDowell was maybe one of the great paperback original writers in America. He always wrote paperback originals. Stephen King thought he was phenomenal. Tabitha King, when McDowell died, I believe he died of AIDS in the 80s,
Mhm.
she finished his last manuscript for him, sort of
Oh, I didn't
at
know
his
that.
request. Yeah. Um, and he's just a really good stylist, a really good craftsman. He has an ear for that part of the country and for big families, which I love. He's most famous for having written the screenplays for Beetlejuice and The Nightmare Before Christmas. And you can
Yeah.
see a bit of Beetlejuice in this with that father daughter relationship between this sort of
Yeah.
like this very rough and tumble kind of overly adult relationship between a father and his daughter. And I don't mean adult in a sexual way, but I mean like, they
Yeah.
insult each other and run each other down and like treat each other like adults, not who are friends rather than a parent and a child. And but it's really good. He's great at the creepy. And I never really understood the elemental thing, but I was looking up a taxonomy of ghosts recently. And so ghosts, there's ghosts, there's theories that ghosts are, the souls of the dead who are still here, or
Mhm.
people who have unfinished business and their soul sticks around, or something's happened over and over and created this psychic impression that repeats this bit of history again and again. And the elemental theory is that this is something supernatural that's pre-human, that is aggressive and violent and connected to some place. And it just wants to hurt things. And so it's like an elemental force of nature as a ghost. And that's what the
Okay.
ghosts are in this. But I think it's phenomenal. I definitely would put it in the freezer. It's so well written.
Mhm.
It's so unique. There's nothing else like it out there. Just the image of these houses out on this spit of land being slowly eaten by the sand. He's really a beautiful writer too. So put it in the freezer.
Definitely. I love that book, and my favorite part of the book was the father-daughter relationship, and the
Yeah,
the dialogue was just so snappy, so back and forth. Like, you can tell that he had screenplay writing chops.
absolutely. And and the whole the thing with the sand. When I rewatched Beetlejuice a few years ago,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they go out and the house is surrounded by sand and there's the big worms and everything. I was
Mhm.
like, the elementals right there.
He knew what he was doing. My last pick is You Should Have Left by Daniel Kellman. This is translated from the German by Ross Benjamin. Have you read this one?
I have not. And I've heard the name before, but I have not, or the title before, but I have not read it. How is it?
It's pretty good. It did get adapted a few years ago by Blumhouse. It was like a Kevin Bacon, Amanda Seyfried movie. I have not
Mm,
seen it, so I do
okay.
not know how it was. It is tiny. It is like this is the size of my hand. It
Oh
is
my
like a
god.
tiny,
It's
yeah, like
adorable.
I know it is like a cute little 100-page book. So this was originally in German. It's epistolary, and it's a 7-day span of the narrator who is a writer who is trying to focus on writing a screenplay. So he's kind of rented out this cabin um, in the, I think it's the German countryside, with his wife and child. And he's just going to hunker down and focus on this screenplay, which is going to be a sequel to the screenplay that made him famous. And he's really struggling with writing the sequel, and he starts to take it out on his wife and kids, but you kind of like all the problems are coming to a head, and he just starts becoming obsessed with things in a very House of Leaves way. Like, he becomes obsessed with the fact that the house doesn't make sense. The dimensions of the house don't make sense when measuring like the outside of the house to the inside of the house, and things like should not be where they are. And it is just about, as you're reading the story, it becomes more claustrophobic, and just his emotional kind of downfall as you kind of see how like obsessed he gets with this house and what things mean. And then he just, with his screenplay and with the relationship with his wife and with his daughter, and just kind of everything piling up on each other.
I see. I'm a sucker for that kind of like dimensional stuff, you know, where
Mhm.
the house doesn't add up. I was always when I read House of Leaves, I always wanted more of that. You
Yeah,
know, so yeah, that's right up my alley.
it's not a big time investment.
No, I know. You know, I really, I wish I could write shorter. Like, I find short is so, Sarah Grant's Come Closer is a great example of a
Mhm.
super short book that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm jealous of this. And how is the translation? Because sometimes I feel like I can tell a translation, like it's got a little
Mhm.
stiffness to it. How was it?
I have not read it for a few years, but I don't remember having issues with it. And you're right, there is kind of like a sense. I read a lot of um, novels that were translated from Japanese, and they do have like a feel to them.
Yeah,
There's like a Japanese to English like translated feel to narratives.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so but this is like, and this is still in print.
I believe so. When
Okay,
did I read this? It's a good question. This came out, or it was translated 2017.
okay,
It was adapted a few years ago. So I would think.
yeah. No, I'm in. I'm gonna grab it as soon as we get off this call.
All right, so that is You Should Have Left by Daniel Kellman.
So my last book is also short, and it's a bit of a switch from the others. I think it's like 148 pages. It's a kid's book, well, like juvenile fiction from 1978 called Moth Manor, like moth, M-O-T-H, Manor, M-A-N-O-R, by Martha Bacon. And it is out of print, but you can find used copies pretty easily, and it is a blast. It is so much. It's about a haunted dollhouse. Basically, these two girls. One is one's Mimi, I know, and the other I think is Sylvia. And they get this dollhouse, and they love the dollhouse, and they play with the dolls, and they get these dolls, and the dolls are this weird assortment of dolls, like a baby doll, and they make the baby the king, and then there's a French doll that everyone falls in love with, and a wooden soldier, and the dolls are all alive. And there's a crisis with a wedding that doesn't come off between the dolls, and after that nothing's the same again. And then the little girls grow up and they get older, and the dollhouse is just this haunted dollhouse in the attic that makes noises from time to time. And then it gets sold. The threat is it's getting sold to a antique dealer who hates it, who's gonna like just sell it off bit by bit. And it is a blast. It's a bit of Phantom Tollbooth, a bit of Neil Gaiman. The
Okay.
writing is phenomenal and hilariously funny. And the incidents are just weird. Like there's a desert where lost things go. If you lose something, it's in the desert, and the desert's very far away and very scary. Um, and there's a real feel for lost childhoods in it. Um, and there's a whole sort of like a minor subplot where like a bat falls in love with one of the dolls, and the dolls are like, "Oh, this is disgusting. This bat's an idiot." Um, and you know, the dolls say things like, "You know, poetry is a dreadful thing. You never know where it's going to lead you. It's horrible." Um, and it's just very, very British and very, very dry, and kind of moving towards the end as these little girls turn into old women, and they get in their 60s and
Aw.
70s and 80s in it, and their relationship with this haunted dollhouse. And it's just, reading it was such a blast of fresh air. It was so much fun. It's one of those books that just kept, every couple of pages there was some turn of phrase or some surreal incident or some odd corner that just kept making me smile. So even though it's about a
Aw.
haunted dollhouse, I would put it on the counter. I wouldn't even put it on the fridge. It is not scary in the slightest. But it is, Mothman is absolutely, I hate to use this word because it sounds so affected and quaint, but it's so charming. Um,
Aw.
so if you need something happy in your life, Moth Manor's got your number.
I was looking this up earlier and it does look very cute. So are there illustrations? Because I do see here
Yes, there are
drawings by
illustrations.
Gail Burrows. So
Yeah, and
aw,
actually the illustrations are the weakest part of the book. They're fine.
really?
There's nothing Yeah, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're pretty straightforward. And the
Mhm.
book is so not straightforward. I mean, it's somewhere between magical realism and fairy tale. That it's really it's just I just it's hard to describe. So the illustrations are sort of standard illustrations that don't quite live up to the tone of the book. I mean, like one doll's from Philadelphia, and it's always talking about me. And they're always like, "You in Philadelphia? Shut up about your Philadelphia. No one cares about your Philadelphia." It's just great. I don't know. I'm going back to read it again. It's 148 pages, and the type's big, and it's got pictures. You can read it in an afternoon.
Aw. I'm gonna see if my library has it.
Yeah, definitely take a look because it's really worth it.
That does. That sounds very cute.
Moth Manor, like moth to flame, and then manor, not like bad manners, but like manor, like a manor house. It's a terrible title. It's really mushy in your mouth. Oh, and if anyone's looking for something, another children's book that's short but that's terrifying about a haunted dollhouse, Among the Dolls by William Sleater, who did House of Stairs, is intense.
Ooh. I'll have to look into that one too. When was that one written?
70s as well. And the
70s.
illustrations in that one
Was
are,
that like a golden era for
yeah, like for well,
children's
also,
books?
it was pre Harry Potter, and it was
Mhm.
pre sort of like before the 80s, children's fiction, I think, was a little rowdier. You know what I mean? No one cared about it as much, so you could get some weird hardcore stuff in there without people noticing. And in the 80s, you had people moving more in a, hey, let's protect the kids and inspire them and things. And then once Harry Potter came along, everyone started paying attention to children's fiction because they realized it can make you a lot of money.
Mhm.
But before that, it was a strange backwater, and especially in the 70s and early 80s, some really weird dark books came out.
This episode is brought to you by Libro FM. Libro FM is the first and only company which lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore. You can pick from more than 150,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there. You know the name. But you'll be part of a different story, one that supports community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro FM app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best. Booksellers. And us. We also have a playlist on there full of books that have been recommended on this podcast. Books in the Freezer special offer. You get 2 audiobooks for the price of one, just $14.99, with your first month of membership using code FreezerBook. This offer is valid for new members in Canada and the United States. Thank you, Libro FM, for supporting the show. Well, one of the traditions on this show is to talk about a chilling obsession, which is something in horror that you have been enjoying recently.
Okay, so my family's so sick of hearing about this, so I'm glad I can inflict it on other people. I watched Adult Swim's Yule Log over Christmas, and it is hands down my favorite horror movie of 2022. Um,
Right.
it's by the guy who did Too Many Cooks, and it is really surreal and really strange and really smart and unexpectedly moving. It is really everything I want in a horror movie, and it's 90 minutes. It's a Yule log video. I don't want to say too much about it, but it really gave me a lot of hope for horror. That something horror could be this funny and strange and creepy and moving. And
Mhm.
the only thing I'll ding it on is it contains, without a doubt, the most egregiously awful Southern accents ever put on film. They are top to bottom, wall to wall, terrible. And you just have to get past that. I have a hard time with it. You got to get past it. And I will say, I watched it by myself, and then I watched it with my family. So we've got everyone there for my 26-year-old nephew. to my 87-year-old, well, no, my mom didn't watch it, but like my sisters who are, my age and
Mhm.
older, and everyone loved it. Everyone really loved it. Or if they didn't love it, they were talking about it afterwards. Um, and my mom's endorsement was, "What were y'all watching? It sounded weird."
I'll have to check it out. I know I heard so many people talking about it
It's
when it
good
came out,
stuff.
so
Yeah. It takes risks. It's smart.
I might have to check it out.
Okay, what's yours?
I have not been watching a ton of horror recently, but The Menu just came on HBO Max, and I will say I had a bit of fun with that.
Ah,
Visually, it was a beautiful film. Ray Fiennes absolutely like embodies the like pretentious chef who takes himself like so seriously and just like has to stop the room and tell him like this story. And I think the dark comedy aspects of it work really well. Just him telling this like awful story with a straight face, and like the group of diners and everything was just hilarious. And I think those are definitely like the parts that worked. So I did have a good time with it.
now let me ask you a question, because this is what I always wonder when it's a horror movie in a restaurant or with a chef. Are they cannibals?
So no, I think everyone
Okay.
that is like that's the thing everyone went in thinking, and they're not.
See, I'm never gonna watch it. My
Okay, so I
I've
didn't
heard
ruin
good.
it for you.
No. I've heard good things about it, but my wife is a chef who owns her own restaurant, uh, and so I've been, you know, part of her life for the entire time she's been a chef. And so for
Mhm.
us, it's like a lawyer watching a courtroom drama. Like we just can't do it. We've tried to watch restaurant movies before, and it's like, where's the table touches? What you're serving from the that side? What are they doing? How are they frying that? Like, we just get so caught up in the liberties they take. How dare they? That it ruins
Mhm.
it for us. It ruins it for anyone around us. It's
Yeah.
so we just stop doing it. I mean, like we watch clips from The Bear and just roll around on the floor laughing because it's
Really,
so,
because that was the one that people were like, "Oh, they really
yeah.
captured like the line cook
Well, I
energy
mean,
of it,"
maybe
and
they
she
do.
disagrees.
Well, it's not just that, it's like it's so over the top intense. It's like they run a restaurant that seems to turn out like grilled cheese sandwiches and french fries, and they're like, "Get off my line, chef! I want to fire all the tuna fish right now!" It's so crazy intense. It would just be like if your mom was in the bathroom screaming like, "Put soap on my hands!" Like, it's just ridiculously over the top. So yeah, we ruin it for everyone. So we can't watch The Menu, unfortunately.
That is hilarious. All right. Well, moving on to the second tradition of our
Okay.
show, I love to ask our guests for a final girl song. So, what is your pick this time?
So the song, what was it last time?
Hazy Shade of Winter by the
Okay.
Beatles.
So the one I'm listening to with the book I'm writing right now, because the book's set in 1970. So this album just came out, and it's set in a home for unwed mothers, and they
Okay.
have a record player, but only two records. And they have a rule that there's no sad songs allowed. And so they have Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water, and they will not let anyone play Bridge Over Troubled Water because it's too sad and life's too sad. But the one song that they will listen to is The Only Living Boy in New York. And so I've been listening to that over and over and over again while I write this book for 2024. Um, so it's very emo choice of mine.
I will have to give that a listen. I don't know that I'm familiar with that one. I was going to say, oh, I'm interested in this 2024 book.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's essentially, and I don't mind this being out there. I've said it, like, blab about it all the time, but it's a uh sort of Rosemary's Baby riff set in a home for
Ooh,
unwed mothers in 1970.
okay.
And I have two relatives, older relatives, who were both sent away back in the day, as they called it, and I've always wanted to write a book set in a home for unwed mothers, just because it was such a horrific concept.
Yeah.
And they were necessary, but they shouldn't have had to be necessary. Like these women, their reputations would have been ruined, their lives would have been ruined because the way we were. Um, but yeah, but it's interesting. One of the things that really comes up a lot doing the research is, um, even though there's this idea that these girls' lives would have been ruined if they had, kept these children, had these babies, and stayed in their communities. It was really fascinating to see that, um, even though Black women and teenagers were sent to homes for unwed mothers, many of them weren't. And actually, because the way our adoption system worked, it was very, very hard. A Black baby was not considered adoptable, what they called. And so a lot of Black women, kept their babies, or their babies were raised within their families. And many of them went on to have perfectly fine lives that they would have had baby or
Mm.
no. I mean, you never know, right? You've got a
Yeah.
baby, your life's gonna be different, but
Yeah.
careers and families and marriage. And so all these all these threats that were told to these white teenagers in these white families, you'll ruin your life, no one will want you, you'll be the
Hmm.
shame of everything. Black communities, by and large, dealt with that in a way that was a little kinder, and a little more caring. And it's just fascinating to see that divide. That yes, for a lot of these girls, their communities would have turned on them, they would have rejected them, but that didn't necessarily have to be the way it was. And there was an
Hmm.
example right there in the way Black communities, would. I mean, I'm not saying they were perfect. I'm sure there was shame and there were Black women being sent to homes from their mothers, but just to see that, like, right there was an example of
Yeah.
how to do it better. But
Yeah.
no one chose to look at it because they were Black people.
That's wild. Yeah, that's something I'm not super familiar with, and that I know that it happened. I know that
Yeah,
people got sent away, but I guess I never put much thought into, like, what was happening in the away. Who were these girls? Where
right.
did they live? What was the structure? Was there, like, a
It's
house mother? Was there, like, a
I
routine?
know. It's weird. I mean, it's a really weird world, and there's not a lot written about it. I mean, I could only find
Mhm,
2 or 3 books, nonfiction books about it. But, it's weird. I mean, in the '70s, they used to advertise babies for adoption in newspapers. They'd say, "Here's our orphan of the week," in
mhm.
the St. Louis Tribune or whatever. It'd be a little
Oh,
cute
wow.
1-year-old, and here his name's Eric, and he's spunky and has blue eyes, and blah blah blah.
Like an animal shelter listing?
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah. Well, I am very much looking forward to that, to see what that has in store for us. Thank you so much for coming on and
Yeah, and I'm so
talking to
sorry I was
me.
late. Um,
You're all good.
but yeah, no, I always have fun doing this. So no, this is great.
Yeah, I think you're the author who's probably been on the most. This is your 3rd time.
Oh my God,
So,
people are so sick of me by now.
yeah, 2 more times, I'll have to send you a jacket or something. The
Please,
5
a
times
jacket.
club.
I don't need another T-shirt, and I don't need a hat. I don't really do hats, but like a jacket, that'd be awesome.
A specific, like, books in the freezer jacket, yeah.
Totally.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
The easiest place to find me or to avoid if you don't want to see me is GradyHendrix.com. It's got the link to all my social media tentacles right there, and everything you need or reject is all in one place.
Okay. Well, awesome. Like I said, thank you again. I had a lot of fun talking haunted houses and killer dolls and all the things.
Awesome. It was a blast.
Books in the Freezer is a bi weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at Books Freezer Pod, on Instagram at Books in the Freezer, or on TikTok at Books in the Freezer. Or you can always send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. You can find show notes for this episode and all previous episodes at booksinthefreezer.com. On there, you will find links to all the books mentioned in the episode, as well as links to the Final Girl playlist and the Patreon and affiliate links that you can click on if you are interested in supporting the podcast in that way. But another way you can support the podcast is to take a minute and leave a review on a site like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And I actually have a new Apple review. I'm so sorry if I don't get this name pronunciation right. But the handle is Tabulando37. And it says 5 stars, great recommendations. I have enjoyed this podcast and been a regular listener for quite some time. It has helped introduce me to a number of new genres and authors I love who I would have not discovered otherwise. Plus, the theme music is cool. Thank you, and keep up the great work. Well, thank you so much for your lovely words. And if you would like your review read on the podcast, just take a moment to type one up on Apple Podcasts. I also would like to say, since the recording of this episode, I have seen both the Adult Swim Yule Log movie, and I loved it. I love that it actually starts out as a Yule log, and just the direction it goes from there is wild. The many directions it goes from there, honestly, wild. Had a fun time with that. And I have also watched Return of the Living Dead, which I greatly enjoyed and cannot believe I have not watched until a few days ago. So that one was on Tubi too, if you're interested in watching that one as well. But I am Stephanie. You can find me on Twitter at lady_Gagnon. That's LADY_GAGNON, or on Instagram at That's What She Read, and that's with 2 A's. It's kind of funny, but I've been mistakenly tagged in tags that are meant for another account. I think there's a That's What She Read with 3 A's, and like they won a giveaway, and I got tagged, and I had to be like, that's not me. But yeah, so That's What She Read with 2 A's. So as always, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.